What's up YouTube, this is Guy, and today on the JustBlueFish channel, we're talking the Rolex Submariner. In particular, we're talking about the Submariner date, reference 116610LN, as opposed to the no-date Submariner. Today, it's long overdue that I'm getting this review video out. If you saw my previous video about this watch, I don't know, almost 2 months ago now probably, it was my first look, my initial impressions of this watch. I'd had it for a short period of time, and I just wanted to give you guys a quick look at it. Well, today, what we're going to do is a full feature-length review of this watch. Now, it's probably going to run a little bit on the long side, if I had to guess. If you're looking for quick 5-6 minute long review videos, this probably is not going to be the one for you. I just don't really do that. There's plenty of channels out there that do quick reviews that just rattle off the specifications and tell you they love the watch without really getting too in-depth. I prefer to give very in-depth and take very critical looks at the products that I'm reviewing, and that's most certainly what we're going to do here today. Now, the Submariner is possibly the most iconic dive watch in the world. First introduced in the early 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, and through very minor variations has progressed to the watch that we have here today on the review table. Sometime in the mid-1960s, of course, they added the date complication with the iconic Cyclops magnifier, which is most similar to the watch that I have. While I am a fan of both the date and the no date, I chose the date because the added functionality of having that complication on my watch is something that I can appreciate. I know a lot of you guys out there are going to say, oh, the Cyclops doesn't look good, I'm not into that, I'd much rather have the no date, it's more symmetrical, it's more clean, it's more classic. I get that. But hopefully you'll enjoy watching my video anyway. We're going to take a close look at it, and besides the date complication and some very, very minor variations to the movement to facilitate that complication, it's basically the same watch. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Alright, we're going to jump over here to the tabletop view and talk about this watch in detail, take some up-close looks at it, and go over all the features. First of all, quickly I want to talk about the basic specifications of the Rolex Submariner 116610LN. I'm sure most of you guys watching this video are already well aware of the basic specs on this watch, but for anyone that happens to not know, here they are. Case dimensions, the diameter, we have a 40 millimeter diameter, although with the crown we have a 44 millimeter diameter. Of course, the lug width is 20 millimeters, and the case thickness is approximately 13 millimeters. Now, from the top of the case to the bottom of the case, from the extremities of lug to lug, or the watch's wingspan, I get a measurement of approximately 48 millimeters. And the weight on this watch, although mine is minus a few links in the bracelet, having been resized already, the weight comes in at 150 grams. MSRP on this watch is $8,550. So the first thing I want to talk about in detail is the case. This is, of course, the 6-digit reference Rolex Submariner, so it's going to have the super case or the maxi case, depending on who you ask. I've heard it called both, and I'm not 100% sure which is the correct naming convention for this case. I believe it's super case because the dial is called the maxi dial. So for the purposes of this review, we'll refer to this as the super case. The reason it's called the super case is because it has these more pronounced oversized crown guards here above and below the crown, as well as a thicker, more substantial shoulder in the lugs. They are quite a bit thicker than the previous generation or the 5-digit reference Rolex Submariner case lugs. This is a change that came about, actually I don't know 100%. I think sometime in the early 2010s they started rolling out this new thicker super case design. At first I wasn't a big fan of it when I started seeing it in pictures, and a lot of people aren't a big fan of it. They prefer the older classic case design, but it has grown on me quite a bit, and ultimately that's why I decided to purchase it. We'll talk about that in more detail a little later on, though. The stuff that I want to talk about now is just the basic, quality and fit and finish on this case. To start with, we have polished flanks on both sides of the case. And the polishing is, quite good. It's a mirrored polish, of course, but because of the shape and the curves of the case, the polishing doesn't look super impressive. It's kind of distorted. Yeah, it's a mirrored finish. You can see reflections there, but as I sort of pan it around, you can see my video camera reflecting there. It's just got this weird distortion. That said, we rarely look at the side of the case anyway, so who cares? But I just did want to say that while it is a very good, high quality, finish or polish job, much better than you're going to find in a lot of the more affordable watches that I've, in particular that I've reviewed in the past. It's not mind-blowingly awesome. What Rolex does do really well, though, is their brushing or brushed finishes. And if we look at the tops of the lugs here, as well as the end links and the bracelet, that brushing is done very well. It looks outstanding. But next to the polishing, it's like the brushing's so nice, and the polishing, it's just kind of so-so. Now, I will say, in regards to the polishing, and I think it's in part because it's 904L stainless steel, there's just something about how this steel picks up and borderline attracts scratches. It shows them very, very readily. If you pick up any sort of scuff marks or scratches, dings or nicks, they just jump out at you on this watch. And that was the case with, and a complaint of, my previously purchased and then sold Rolex Explorer. Now, the Explorer had a smooth, polished bezel, so when that got scratched up, it was just bang, right up in your face all the time, and it was kind of a disappointment. On this watch, I got some scuff marks and some scratch marks. I got a lot of fingerprints on there, too. Let me go ahead and give that a little wipe with my polish cloth here. But yeah, once we get the fingerprints out of the way, you'll probably see there's some scratches, some swirl marks. It just picks it up, and this watch is only, like I said, a couple of months old now. The brushed finish is no different, and you can see on my clasp, it's already picking up a lot of little scratches. This isn't a big deal, but I have much more inexpensive watches with 316L steel, and they don't attract and show and basically get as worn nearly as quickly to my eye. Something to keep in mind if you're the type of person that absolutely wants to have their watch looking, brand new, minty as long as possible. My experience so far with a couple of Rolexes, stainless steel Rolexes in particular, is that it feels impossible if you're going to wear it to keep it looking really, really nice long term. So that is what it is. The case back on this watch is pretty basic. It's a Rolex case back. No decoration, no printing or text of any type. It does have a little bit of a polished inner bevel, and then the flat of the case back is, just a matching brushed finish. It looks fine. Some people would prefer to have some sort of notation or decoration on their case backs, or, potentially even an exhibition crystal see-through window. I actually kind of like the simplicity of the case back on Rolex watches, or their sports watches anyway. So that's not a complaint in my book. The last piece of the case to kind of talk about, and this isn't directly the case, but it is the crown, which is, of course, is attached to the case. Like I had mentioned, we do have these large, sort of stout, oversized crown guards, and then the Rolex trip lock crown. And you can tell that it is designated as a trip lock crown due to the three little dots that appear below the coronet logo. There's sort of a myth on the internet and amongst people that are somewhat uninformed that if your crown, when it's screwed down, doesn't have the coronet logo pointing up in this direction, that's a flaw, potentially it's a fake. That's not the case. I've looked at dozens and dozens of different Rolexes at the authorized dealer, and the orientation of the coronet logo on the crown when it's screwed in, every which direction. There's no rhyme or reason to it. That's not some sort of quality control flaw. It's not something to be concerned about. Now, the crown itself has a texturing or a knurling on it that is some of the best in the business, in my experience. It gives a very, very clean, crisp purchase when you're grabbing onto the crown to unscrew it. And the threading, the action of unscrewing the crown is fantastic. It's again, the best in the business from my, albeit somewhat limited, experience. Unscrewing the crown out to the first position, of course, gives you hand wind, and winding the movement is very, very silky smooth. Pulling the crown out to the second position lets you quick set the date complication, and pulling the crown out to the final position will allow you to stop the movement from running and set your handset, which we'll probably take a closer look at that later. The next thing I want to look at and talk about is the crystal and the bezel. Since they're both kind of on the same area, we'll cover them both. The crystal, this is another complaint of mine about Rolex watches. There's no anti-reflective coating at all. At a minimum, we'd like to see, at least in my opinion, an anti-reflective coating on the underside of the crystal to make the watch more legible ultimately. As you can see, I'm getting all kinds of reflective problems, I guess, for lack of a better term, as I pan the watch around my studio. It is very, very reflective, and when you catch it in the wrong light, it sort of makes everything look just a little bit, hazy is the way that I would describe it. I believe there is AR coating underneath the date complication magnifier, though. I've read that is the case anyway. I don't know that to be 100% true, but that is something that I have read. And just by my eye here, if we're looking at it objectively, it does seem that there's less reflection, less of that sort of haziness if you're looking through the magnifier as opposed to, the rest of the dial or the crystal. That said, it is a sapphire crystal, so it should be virtually scratch proof, although sapphire crystals are known to shatter relatively easily. I've never shattered one myself, but I guess that's, a concern. I suppose if, push came to shove, would I rather a crystal that were more scratch resistant or a crystal that were more shatter resistant? I would, of course, take the scratch resistance because that's a real problem that you're going to encounter much more often than shattering a crystal, in my opinion, anyway. Other than the crystal, though, I also want to talk about, again, the bezel. The bezel on this is what Rolex calls their ceramic Cerachrome bezel insert. Now, the bezel is a couple of pieces. There's the metal outer ring, which is, of course, a bidirectional rotating bezel, 120 clicks, of course, and the action of spinning the bezel or setting your elapsed time indicator is fantastic. Of course, how this works is you would rotate the triangle around to where your current minute hand is at, and as time passes, wherever the minute hand is pointing towards the graduated markers on the bezel, gives you a pretty good estimate as to how much time has elapsed. So when the minute hand were to be pointing over here at approximately 6:32 or 33, we know that roughly 10 minutes has passed. But yeah, the overall action of setting the bezel, it's fantastic. It's the absolute best bezel that I have ever used. There is one minor complaint that I have about the bezel, and I guess this is maybe the bezel or the insert, I'm not sure. In my opinion, to my eye, if I'm looking at the watch dead on, the triangular 12 o'clock or 0 marker does not align perfectly with my dial, the hash mark for the 12 o'clock pip or what's the word I'm looking for here? Indicator, I guess. It looks like it's just off a hair to me. Now, I started doing a little research on whether or not this is some sort of known issue or if it was a very, very uncommon flaw that happened to be, something that I just got unlucky with. Apparently, when they switched over to these ceramic bezels, this has become a more and more increasingly common problem with, I guess, not only Submariners, but potentially also GMT Master 2s. The way that they assemble these is not to pop the insert in when the bezel is on the watch. I don't know the process precisely, but the moral of the story is that it gets assembled off the watch and then placed on the watch, and for whatever reason it makes it extremely difficult to perfectly align it. So it is apparently not uncommon to get a slightly misaligned bezel. I've seen pictures of other people's online that is significantly worse than what I have on mine. And I'll just come in really close here and see if it's more apparent as I get really in there. You can see it's just a maybe just a hair to the right. It's very, very close, but when it's on my wrist and I look down at it, I can kind of notice that it depends on which angle I'm holding the watch at too, obviously, as you can see. It always looks like it's a little bit off to the right to me, slightly. Not even like a half a click or anything. A hair, a millimeter, maybe even a fraction. It's not something that I'm willing to send the watch into Rolex and ask them to fix it, although I'm assuming they would if you were so inclined. I don't think it's worth the hassle, but if it were significantly misaligned, like some of the ones that I've seen pictures of, I would potentially consider it. Now, the material of the insert, this Cerachrome ceramic, is also much like sapphire, virtually scratch proof or scratch resistant. The problem that I have with it, and other than the fact that it picks up, fingerprints like crazy, which is probably apparent as I'm holding the watch here, so I'll wipe that away for you guys. It's really, really glossy. So again, we have this reflective crystal. We also have this very reflective bezel insert. You can see over on this side here, my studio light's reflecting in it like crazy. What it does is when it's just on the wrist and you glance down at your watch really quick, depending on the surroundings that are being reflected into the crystal, it's not going to look really, really inky dark black. And I would prefer it to always look just stark black. And it really doesn't. If you're in a room that has light colored walls, much like the room that I'm in right now, at different angles it kind of looks almost charcoaly or gray because it's reflecting a light colored surface in its in its finish. I mean, it's not a big deal. Number one, I like that it won't get scratched up. Also, it's resistant to UV rays, so it's not going to fade over time. That's also great as well. But the fact that in my opinion anyway, not fact, I suppose, it's not as aesthetically pleasing to look at as the older aluminum bezels because they had more of a matte, less reflective finish. That's a little bit of a negative. Now, the markers or the graduations on the bezel are etched in and then platinum filled. They look fantastic. As you run your finger over them, you can feel them. You can feel that they are, again, etched in. I don't know if that's the right word that I'm looking for, but it's recessed. Maybe I can get in really close and give you guys a better example. You can sort of see the shadowing of the inset of those graduated marks on the bezel. It does look really, really very good, but just that glossy, it almost looks wet all the time, ceramic material. It's not my favorite. So there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to talk about on this watch, and I'm going to say like, this kind of bothers me, that kind of bothers me. These are all really minor things. It's not like at the end of this video there's going to be a list of 10 things that bother me, and oh, by the way, I don't want this watch anymore. None of them are, make or breaks for me. It's just, little observations that I've made over the course of the last couple of months that I've had this watch. So, that said, mostly the bezel is fantastic. The actual action of the bezel, setting it, rotating it, is outstanding. The fact that this material on the insert, the Cerachrome, is so resilient is really good. But yeah, it's not as aesthetically pleasing as I would like it. The other aspect of the bezel that's fantastic is the edging. I don't know what you would call this. The texture on the edge. It is very sharp and crisp, I guess, is one way that I would describe it. You get such a good grip on it because it's not smooth. It's very, you get a good bite on your skin as you grab it. I really like that in comparison to, say, my Seiko SKX, which is a watch that I absolutely love. This one is so much more easier to manipulate because of the texturing, because of the action of the spring mechanism that's inside of there. The whole package, it's really outstanding. So yeah, we're going to move on now and talk about the dial, the handset, and the date complication. The dial and the handset on this watch is for sure one of the most important aspects of the overall design for me and what attracts me to this watch and Rolex watches in general. I'm going to go ahead and zoom the camera in a little bit closer so I don't have to hold the watch up so high, so that we can really drill into the dial and take a nice close look at it. So we have this beautiful glossy inky black dial with 18 karat gold outlined markers and an 18 karat gold Rolex Mercedes handset. And then of course a date complication over at the 3 o'clock position, covered by the Cyclops 2.5 times magnifier. I think that it is absolutely classic and beautiful. It is very simple, but it just works, and it's apparent that it works really well because so many other companies have copied or homaged this design over the course of the last 50, 60 years. It is really a timeless and classic, fantastic design. Now, this dial is a little bit different than previous generation dials in that it has the maxi dial, as they call it. The maxi dial has larger indexes or markers for all of the hour markers, and I believe the handset is beefed up ever so slightly as well. I think that proportionally this looks much, much better than the older five-digit reference Rolex Submariners. It looks more balanced. It looks more proportionally correct to me. I'm glad that they upsized all of the markers on this dial. Now, a lot of people complain about the date complication, and more specifically about that Cyclops magnifier covering the date. When you kind of look down at the watch from an angle like this, you can't read the date at all because of the magnifier. You got to be looking at it pretty much dead on to be able to read your date cleanly and accurately. Yeah, that is a little bit of a negative. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to try to deny that. However, there's something interesting that I noticed when I was looking at this 116610 side by side with a no-date Submariner, or the no-date is just the Submariner. This is the Submariner date. So when you're looking at this watch side by side with a no-date, to me, the no-date looks a little bit bigger, and it's sort of an optical illusion. When you're looking at this one, because you have this Cyclops here and the date, everything feels a little bit closer together, a little more compact. On the other hand, on the no date, you just have a marker just like this 9 o'clock marker on the 3 o'clock side. And the dial sort of looks a little more spread out and airy, if that's a good way to describe it. To me, because it's more spread out, because it's less cluttered, it feels like a bigger watch. Again, I think it's an optical illusion. Your mileage may vary. You may say, no, I don't see it. That's okay. Nobody has to agree with me on that. But I do feel like when I had those two watches, this watch and the other one side by side, that because the date was there, it made this feel like a little bit of a smaller, more compact presentation. Other than that, yeah, I like the date. I'm glad to have the date there. It's super legible when you're looking dead on. I don't mind the Cyclops one bit. So yeah. Now the handset and the markers, and we'll get in here a little bit closer. With all of the glare on the crystal, it doesn't really present well on camera. Like, I got to catch it in the right light. Again, white 18 karat gold on all of the surroundings of the markers and as well as the handset. It's excellent presentation. I like the Mercedes hands, and I like that they beefed it up, the handset, ever so slightly as compared to the older references. Now, something that is another potential quality control issue, I guess, we were talking about the alignment of the luminous pip to your 12 o'clock marker. Another thing that I noticed that people complain about, and this happened on mine, I'm going to get in real close here. If you look at the Rolex logo, the coronet above the word Rolex, the center spire of the little crown should theoretically be aligned perfectly with the point of the 12 o'clock marker. And you can see that mine is misaligned a little bit to the right. Yeah, it's another thing that happens as far as quality control goes. Rolex isn't perfect, apparently, despite the fact that they market their product as the Rolex way, being kind of perfection. Now, there's little teeny tiny inconsistencies here and there, like the bezel alignment, like the printing of the logo on the dial being slightly misaligned. Another really common misalignment issue is on the rehaut. The little coronet up at the 12 o'clock position there, you can see on mine, it is again misaligned off to the right ever so slightly. These are all little things that are going to bother some people quite a bit. To me, it's not a big deal. And the reason why is because I looked at so many different examples at the dealer before I picked this one that none of them were really perfect, or I would have picked a perfect one, of course. I never saw a single Rolex, and I know they're out there, obviously. I know that this isn't super common, but I didn't see any Rolexes with a perfectly aligned rehaut or rehaut, where the coronet up there at the 12 o'clock position lines up perfectly with the little graduation or hash mark for the 12 o'clock position on the dial. They were all off by a hair. I didn't look closely at the logo of the coronet and how it lines up to the point of the 12 o'clock triangle marker. I just noticed that on mine after the fact. But I also, didn't really see many that had much better bezel alignment than this one either. As a matter of fact, and I'll talk about this a little bit when we're talking about quality control, this is my second Submariner. I had one for 3 days that had some pretty significant problems with the movement, and I ended up returning that one and getting this one in exchange. So yeah, when we're talking about Rolex being quote unquote perfect, they're not perfect, but they are very, very good. Without a doubt, the quality and the craftsmanship is outstanding, but perfect? No, it is not perfect. Now, the final thing that we want to talk about on this watch as far as the major features is going to be the bracelet. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom the camera out a hair and take a look at the bracelet, I suppose. One other thing I want to actually point out here before we zoom away from the dial is, of course, the printing on the 6 o'clock side. Submariner, 1,000 feet, 300 meter, Superlative Chronometer officially certified. Something interesting that I've noticed, the fonts are different from, year to year. Like, you can see on the 300 meter indication on my dial there, it's 300M. Well, I've seen other watches where it's 300 space M, so there's a little bit of a space between the 300 and the M. And then I've seen watches just like mine that have the 300 and the M. There's also been some minor variations in the overall typeset or the font on the dial itself. Little strange inconsistencies that Rolex changes from year to year, and a lot of people try to use those little inconsistencies as indicators that, oh, this watch is fake, this watch is real, because, whatever, the 300M isn't spaced the same way. That's not a good indicator as to authenticity of a Rolex, because Rolex themselves does make these little changes from year to year. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. We're going to take a look at the bracelet here, and then jump back over to the other perspective, and we'll discuss a few more things about this watch. So the Oyster Bracelet that comes on all of Rolex's sports watches is somewhat legendary. It's considered one of the best in the business, and I do agree. It is fantastic in most regards. It's very, very high quality. It's very comfortable, and overall, yeah, there's not a lot to complain about it. But I do have some complaints anyway. Number one, I don't like how much of a taper the bracelet has. So let me kind of see if there's a good way for me to hold this and show the taper. Maybe like this, yeah. So you can see up at the lug, we're at 20 millimeters. And then down at the clasp end, I think it tapers down to between 15 and 16 millimeters. My calipers doesn't have a digital readout, so it's hard to get a perfect measurement, but somewhere between 15 and 16 here at where the clasp connects. That's a whole lot of taper, more than I would prefer. Going down from 20 to 18 would be fine for me, but it's a little bit thinner than I would like aesthetically. That said, it's not, again, none of these things are big make or break deals for me. It's just something that, I don't prefer. Now, the first thing I want to talk about on the bracelet, the end links. They are, of course, solid end links, as you can see there, and you would expect that at a watch at an $8,000+ price point. But the thing that is really impressive about the end links is how incredibly fine they are machined. There's nothing like this that I've ever seen on any other watch. A little bit of dust there, but they are like almost sculpted. And if I'm trying to get the camera to focus here good, the end links sit into the lugs a little bit here, and then the center horn comes out, and that's where the first link attaches. It's, again, just sculpted so beautifully, so precisely. That's something that actually really impresses me about this watch. Now I'll show you something else. Here is just a standard Hamilton dive watch, and this is kind of typical. The end links are more of a U shape, and then the first link sets into the U. And there's always some sort of like lines here on not always, I guess, but very regularly or routinely. They have like some sort of line here to kind of match up with the bracelet. And it's always just kind of pressed in or maybe engraved in lightly. It just looks cheap, I guess is the way that I would describe it. And Rolex, the end links on the Oyster bracelets and the that attach to the Oyster cases, they look anything but cheap. They're just exquisitely done. Now the links themselves, they're all, again, fantastic. The brushing, which I've touched on, looks outstanding. The sides of the links are all polished, of course, and they are held in with a screw system. One downside to the screw system on these Oyster bracelets is finding the correct screwdriver to resize this. Very difficult, because it's not perfectly 1.6 millimeters, and that's the size that everybody would recommend you use. I think it's 1.7, and nobody makes a 1.7 millimeter screwdriver. And ideally, you would have a hollow ground screwdriver instead of a tapered screwdriver bit, and almost nobody makes hollow ground screwdrivers. You have to grind them down yourself to get the appropriate fit into those screw heads. So that's a minor annoyance about the Oyster bracelet, in my opinion. So yeah, it would be nice if the screw head size was a little bit more standard on these Oyster bracelets. There's workarounds out there, I know, but I prefer to be able to do it myself as opposed to take it to the jeweler, and I don't want to risk, mucking up the screw heads just to make a simple adjustment to a bracelet. But it's not impossible. Like I said, there are workarounds out there. There are tools that you can get that will work, from what I understand. I just don't want to risk it. So I end up having to take a ride down to the authorized dealer and have them resize it if I ever need to take a link out or add a link, which I have done. As you can see, I've added a half link to the 6 o'clock side of my bracelet here. So yeah, it's, again, a slight annoyance, but not the end of the world. Now, moving on, the rest of the bracelet, of course, we did talk about, again, the polishing, or I'm sorry, brushing, I guess technically, on the Oyster bracelet with the polished side links. It all looks fantastic. Then that brings us to the clasp. So we have what Rolex calls their Oyster Lock safety clasp with glide lock extension. First things first, as is the complaint about the 904L in general, you can see I've already picked up a ton of little scuff marks on the clasp of the bracelet. I mean, that's probably one of the most common places to get your Rolex scuffed up and marked up on. But after only 2 months of wear, it's a lot more than, again, any other more affordable watches in my collection. So something about this steel is just really soft and very easy to pick up scuff marks. That said, the rest of the clasp, aside from that little aspect, it is fantastic. First of all, you have the fold over safety latch, which has the little Rolex coronet there. Looks very nice, very well made. The lockup of that safety latch is fantastic. It just clicks in very, very positively. It's done, honestly perfectly. From there, you open up the safety latch, and you have this hinged lever on your bracelet's clasp here. You can open that up, and then that brings out the swing arm, and obviously opens the bracelet. One thing I will note, I've seen people complain about this online, the hinged clasp portion here. Very, very good, strong spring action. But if you look at it, there's quite a bit of side-to-side or lateral play in it. It doesn't seem to be a problem. I've just seen people online complain about that. Not a big deal to me, but yeah, keep in mind if yours does that, that apparently is quite normal to have that much lateral play. Now the sides of your clasp are also high polished to match the edges of all of the links on the bracelet. And the swing arm is kind of decorated nicely. I mean, you got the Rolex name and logo there. Very high polished blades of the swing arm, both blades, very nicely machined. And then the clasp itself is a nice solid machined clasp. The thing that most people really like about this clasp, and I really like it too, is the glide lock extension system. Everybody's pretty much going to know how this works, but I'll demonstrate it anyway. You can flip out the link, and then when it's in this position, you can slide the extension fore and aft up to 20 millimeters in 2 millimeter increments. I'm going to probably say something that most people don't say about it, and it's a mild complaint about this glide lock system. Well, I guess technically there's a couple little mild complaints. First of all, let me go on record as saying it is excellent. It's probably one of the best systems for being able to resize your bracelet on the fly, without a doubt. But it's not flawless. First of all, moving it back and forth, it's a little not sticky, it's just not super smooth. And it has gotten better as it's broken in. But when it was brand new, sliding it forward and backward, it was kind of, I don't know, herky-jerky. You know, it's like I'm right here, and then it's like kind of resistance, and then a big push. So yeah, there's just steps of resistance in adjusting or sliding it. The next kind of annoying thing about it is, let's say I'm in this position right here. As you can see, it didn't close all the way. So let's say I'm in this position, and I want to make it a little bit tighter. It's a little bit difficult to just slide it forward a single specific amount and close it back up. You know, sometimes you'll do this and you'll think, did I go one step or did I go two steps? When you're looking at the underside of the clasp, you can see there's these little cavities. And if you kind of look at it, you can say like, okay, I'm going to just move it down one little cavity and try to snap it in. But oftentimes you won't move it quite far enough, and you'll try to snap it closed. And you can only snap it closed when it's in the proper position. Sometimes it will kind of snap down, but like this, not all the way. And then you have to move it one direction or another to get it to engage completely. So it's a little bit, and I do say that a little bit difficult. It's not difficult, but it's a little bit difficult to try to get a very precise, again there you see it didn't snap all the way closed. I'm a little too far in the center of one of them, so I kind of got to slide it. Well, if that's not the position I wanted, now I got to try to do it again and slide it forward and find the notch that I want the clasp to go in. So yeah, it's not very precise. On clasps that just have the holes on the side, it's a little annoying because you need a tool to depress the spring bar to move the bracelet in or out, but it is very precise at least. But, you know, that's a minor thing. You might have to play around with it a little bit to get the sizing exactly perfect and where you want it. It might take a few tries to get it to click into the exact perfect position, but it works really, really well. It's very, very convenient. It's very nicely made. So take my criticisms of it with more or less a grain of salt. You know, it's not bad. It's just something that most people don't discuss when they talk about this clasp. You know, it's not flawless. It's not like it's without some shortcomings. They're just very, very minor. So yeah, overall, would I rate this watch, the Rolex Submariner, the 6-digit reference, the newest models, would I rate it a 10 out of 10? You know, I don't know. I think that there's a few little things about it that might keep it from being a perfect 10, but it is quite good. It's, you know, downright fantastic. But nothing is without its flaws. So, you know, all of the little things that I've mentioned are, again, little things. But keep things, you know, keep it in perspective. It's not flawless. It's not absolute perfection. And even at this price point, I guess the moral of the story is that expecting that is potentially unreasonable, I guess. We're going to jump back over to the other perspective, and I'm going to talk about a few other things in closing, and we'll wrap up this review video. One thing I didn't mention in the tabletop portion of this review is the Lume. We didn't touch on the Lume really. What do I think about the Chromolite Lume on the Submariner? Well, I'll roll in some video of it so you guys can see it. And yeah, what's my opinion on it? My opinion is it's not really very bright, surprisingly. It's probably dimmer than a Seiko Lume Bright watch for sure. Of course, Seikos are green and this Chromolite is blue. But yeah, it's not super bright. It is pretty long lasting and it is perfectly legible in total darkness. But I was a little surprised by the dimness in general. So yeah, I did want to mention the Lume in this review video and tell you guys about that. It's good. It looks nice, but yeah, a little bit on the dim side. So one thing that a lot of people go through when they're buying their first Submariner, and I had this internal debate as well, is should I get the date or the no date? Now, they're both awesome, for sure. I like them both, and it was a difficult decision. Ultimately, for me, it came down to the functionality, I guess, the usefulness of having a date complication. I just really enjoy having a date complication on my watches. Now, most people are, again, going to say, not most people, but most people that don't like the sub date are going to say that it's for reasons of aesthetics and style. They don't like the look of the Cyclops lens on the crystal. You know, I get that. I think if you look at them side by side, and I mentioned this earlier, to me, the no date looks a little bit bigger, and it's an optical illusion, but the date complication and that Cyclops magnifier on the crystal, it just makes the dial kind of feel a little more crowded and condensed to me. And when I was holding them at the authorized dealer side by side, I wanted not to have the presentation of an even larger watch. I much more greatly prefer smaller watches, and this watch is not a very large watch for a dive watch, but it is a big watch for a watch. So yeah, I just felt like that was another checkbox in the column for the date. It, to my eyes, just kind of presents a little bit smaller. And again, I don't think that everyone is going to agree with me on that. It's just the way I felt about it. Do I dislike the date or the no date version? Of course not. I think that it is really nice looking. I understand why people are so attracted to the aesthetic of the very clean, simple, traditional layout. You know, that's actually, traditional is an interesting word. Is the no date more traditional than the Submariner date? I understand that the original Submariners did not have a date complication. And by that measure, you would certainly say that yes, the no date is more traditional. However, I think that the Cyclops magnifier has become so ubiquitous with the word and the brand of Rolex that to me, when I think of a Rolex, I think of that magnifier, and in my mind, that's more traditional. But, you know, it's in my mind. It's probably not technically more traditional. So yeah, I like the date complication. I don't mind having the magnifier. I don't think it's a beautiful addition to the crystal, but I don't mind it. And, you know, like I said, there's other minor aesthetic things that I think help it as far as how it presents. Another question that people have when they're purchasing a Submariner is, should I get the previous generation 5-digit reference, or should I get the current generation 6-digit reference? So what we're talking about is the reference number of the watch. In this case, it's 116610. 6 digits, 6-digit reference is why it's referred to that. Now, these watches look a lot different. I mean, they're at a glance recognizable as Submariners, whether it's one or the other. But because of that super case and because of that maxi dial, the newer 6-digit reference Submariners are beefier. They look larger, and a lot of people feel that they don't look very balanced. They look just too stout, too squat. You know, I don't know the right word to describe it. When I was originally looking at watches, Rolexes in general, about a year ago, maybe more actually, I sort of felt the same way. I thought that the previous 5-digit reference numbered Submariners looked better, and over time, my opinion on that has changed. It's done a complete 180-degree swap. I now greatly prefer the super case and the maxi dial, particularly the maxi dial. I think that the maxi dial looks significantly better than the older dial with the much smaller indices or markers. Now, when I look at the older version with the slimmer case and the more tapered lugs, what I see is just bezel and dial, and it sort of makes the whole thing very round and very bulbous looking with sort of delicate looking lugs. To me now that looks imbalanced, and the newer one with the super case, to me that now looks more balanced. I will agree that the way that the bracelet transitions from the case to down the bracelet, that does look a little off, and I sort of already said in the tabletop portion that I think the bracelet has too much taper. So you go from these big wide lugs down to this narrow tapering, very strong tapering bracelet, and that does look a little bit off to me, but it's not a big enough problem that I would say, I don't want to have a 6-digit Submariner, obviously, right? But yeah, just the overall delicate size of the lugs on the old one, and the way that the bezel and the dial look so round and just prominent, it makes it look imbalanced to me now. So I'm much happier that I got this particular one as opposed to a vintage one or a previous generation. I actually had the opportunity when I was at my authorized dealer to get either. They had a pre-owned, beautifully not refinished, recently serviced and brushed and polished. It looked like new. It was fantastic. And, I got to sit them both side by side. It was previous generation Submariner date and the current Submariner date. And side by side, when I had them both in my hands and I tried them both on my wrists, it was absolutely no question whatsoever. I much preferred the newer 6-digit reference sub. So yeah, it's something that everybody goes through. I think maybe not everybody, but a lot of people certainly do. Some people are just, set in their ways and they know right off the bat what they want. Good for them. But, for me and for lots and lots of other people out there, it's something that you have to decide on. I liked the newer technology. Technology is the right word, but the design and the styling more. 6-digit for me, absolutely. We did talk about quality control, little tiny problems that mine have, that I've seen other people discussing online, be it the alignment of the rehaut or the alignment of the logo on the dial, little things like that. Yeah, it's kind of annoying that an $8,000 watch is going to have a slightly misaligned bezel from time to time. And, from time to time, I don't mean 1 in 100. I think it's more common than that even. It's slightly annoying that we're going to have those kind of problems in a watch at this price point, particularly when Rolex is selling, quote-unquote perfection, right? Is it inexcusable? I guess it depends on who you ask. In my mind, I don't know. Kind of, if I'm being honest. Kind of, it's inexcusable. But, there's not a whole lot you can do about it other than hunt for an absolutely perfect example. And I suppose they're out there. I suppose if you're not in a hurry and there's not a shortage on the market, you could hunt for an absolutely perfect example. I wasn't about to do that. I did look at several at the store, and I went with this one. Well, technically not this one. I'll explain that next. So when we're talking about quality control, one thing to touch on is the movement, the accuracy of the movement, the health of the movement. If you watched my video on, I had 2 videos. I reviewed my time grapher, and then I showed you how to regulate a simple automatic watch. We put the watch in question, in this case it was a Seiko SKX, on the time grapher, and went ahead and checked the accuracy and the health of the movement and all of the different positions, and went through that whole process. Well, of course, when I brought home my new Submariner, I was going to not regulate it, but I was going to at least put it on my time grapher and have a look at the movement. And I'll roll in a picture of what I was getting on the time grapher with that first watch that I got, because this isn't the original watch. This is my second Submariner. I was getting I'm going to call it a pretty big problem with the movement. Now, you could probably debate on whether it's really big or not, but if you look at this trace line on my time grapher, first of all, the amplitude is a bit low at 370 or something in that, 270, I'm sorry, or something in that ballpark. It should be 300 ideally in the dial-up position. But if you look at the trace line on the graph, you can see that there's the bottom line. It's bouncing all over the place. That's indicative of some sort of problem with your movement. Potentially it could be magnetism, but in this case I don't think that was it because I tested it for magnetism. I think what was going on was the pallet fork on one side only was, damaged or potentially dirty. I'm not exactly sure, but it is clearly not beating uniformly. When I discovered that, I contacted the authorized dealer and I said, look, I'm not really happy with this, and I'm not willing to send in a watch that I've owned for 3 days, because it was a Friday when I bought it, and I contacted them on the following Monday. I said, I'm not willing to send in a watch that I've only owned for 3 days to get serviced and wait potentially a month or 2 months to get it back. So can you do something for me? And I have a pretty good relationship with particularly this person at the authorized dealer. I believe he was like the director of sales or something. He wasn't just a standard salesman. But I showed him all of my data from the time grapher. I explained my situation. And he said, yeah, bring the watch in. We'll throw it on the time grapher down here. And I'll swap you out with a brand new one if there's a problem. So I did, and they did. They gave me this one that I currently have now. So I'm really fortunate that my authorized dealer was willing to accommodate me, being as how this was my second watch that I purchased from them this year, and that I'm kind of friends with him now. I've been in there, a dozen or more times. He's loaned me his personal watches to do reviews on the YouTube channel, including an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. That watch came from him, not the store. It didn't belong to the store. It belonged to him and his personal collection. So we were pretty friendly. I built up a relationship with him, and again, I'm fortunate that Jonathan down there at the authorized dealer was willing to take care of me on this, because I was not satisfied with the first watch that I got. So yeah, quality control. Did that leave Rolex with the movement functioning that way? Was it dropped at some point and maybe sustained some damage during shipping or, at some other time? I can't really say for sure. It's certainly possible that it was a quality control issue. It's certainly possible that it left Rolex like that. Besides the fact that the movement was clearly not running correctly, it was not keeping time inside of the plus or minus 2 seconds per day that Rolex advertises. Now, if we talk about that specific part of their advertising, that is the precision or the superlative certification that they put all of their watches through, my original Rolex Explorer did also not keep time at plus or minus 2 seconds per day. This new Submariner that I currently have is extraordinarily accurate. It is basically dead on all the time. If I wear it and rest it, dial up at night, it does seem to potentially lose fractions of a second depending on how long I wear it. If I rest it longer, it catches back up. But if I wear it for, say, 16 hours a day and only rest it for 8 hours a day, over the course of a week, it will probably lose 2 seconds. On the other hand, if I rest it for more, like if I wear it for 12 and rest it for 12, it seems to keep perfect time. So as it's resting dial up, it catches back up to whatever it lost during the course of the day of being on my wrist. So I'm extraordinarily happy with the current movement that I have. But 2 out of the 3 Rolex watches that I have had did not have particularly accurate movements vis-a-vis what they advertise. I mean, they were accurate for a watch, for a mechanical watch or an automatic watch. The Rolex Explorer ran a little bit fast, maybe 4 seconds per day. That first Submariner, I'm not exactly sure because I only had it for a few days, but it was kind of in that same ballpark, 4 or 5 seconds fast. Considering that there was some other problems with the movement, though, I don't even care what its accuracy was. But yeah, I mean, 2 out of 3 of the Rolexes that I've had in the last, call it year, but it's been less than that, did not have perfectly functioning movements, at least, vis-a-vis the accuracy, and of course, just straight up working correctly. So is that a quality control issue? I mean, I don't know. There's a very divisive and polarizing argument on different forums when you talk about watch accuracy, whether it's Rolex or any other watch. Some people don't care. As long as it's not gaining or losing minutes per day, it's good enough. I'm not in that camp. It has to be within the specs that are advertised at a minimum. And some watches have pretty broad specifications. Like a Seiko watch running the 7S26, its specifications are -20 to +40 seconds per day. If I had a watch that was running -20, I'd open it up and regulate it myself or find someone to do it for me. That's not good enough, even though it's technically within the specifications from the manufacturer. But when we're talking about Rolex and their advertised accuracy of ±2, if it's running +4, then it's 100% outside of its, advertised range. So like I said, there's a lot of people online that argue about this. Some just straight up don't care as long as it's quote unquote good enough. And some people like me do care quite a bit. Now, I'm going to do a video talking about accuracy and precision completely on its own because, like I said, it's a divisive and hotly debated topic. Here's the one thing that I will mention in this video. When Rolex website and marketing says that the movement is accurate from ±2 seconds per day, does that mean that it's accurate to that level on your wrist? A lot of people, the ones that generally are people that say that they don't really care about accuracy anyway, will contend that no, that is not what they mean. They mean that in the lab, at the factory, on the time grapher, it's ±2. But when you get it home, when you're putting it on the wrist through the course of different wear habits and different temperatures and different environments, all bets are off. That's what some people say. Now I'm going to quote you something that comes from the issue of the Rolex magazine that's all about the Submariner. And you tell me what you think this means. All right, so I've got my Rolex magazine here, page 150. They say Superlative Chronometer Certification. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. I'm going to read the third and fourth paragraphs, which are the important ones. The certification applies to the fully assembled watch after casing the movement, guaranteeing superlative performance on the wrist in terms of precision, power reserve, waterproofness, and self-winding. The precision of a Rolex Superlative Chronometer is of the order of -2 + 2 seconds per day, or more than twice that which is required of an official chronometer. The precision is tested by Rolex using an exclusive methodology that simulates the condition in which the watch is actually worn and is much more responsive to real-life experience. So, let's set my book down here. What does that mean? Does that mean that you should expect ±2 seconds per day on the wrist or not? In my mind, yes, that is exactly what it means. I've had people online on forums argue with me that it does not mean that whatsoever. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to argue against that. It is what it is. But in my mind, yes, absolutely, it should be on the wrist when you're wearing it, ±2. The second reason why I believe that is if it's not, let's say it was running +4. I could call up Rolex and say, I've got this watch, it's under warranty, and it's running 4 seconds fast. They'll tell you to send it in and they'll regulate it. No charge, as long as it's under warranty. I mean, you probably have to pay shipping, I guess, but so if they're willing to quote-unquote fix it, and the book says what I interpret as this is our policy on the Superlative Chronometer certification, Again, I don't know how you argue against it, but yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big debate. We'll talk about it in another video. I just wanted to touch on that specific aspect of the quote-unquote quality control that goes on at Rolex. So finally, I want to talk about the price and value of the Rolex Submariner, and as well discounts for buying from authorized dealers and the availability. We'll touch on availability first. Right now, at the end of 2017, November, there is not very many steel sports watches from the Rolex brand to go around, is my understanding. If you go into an authorized dealer, there might be some or there might be none. Depends on where you're at and who the dealer is, I guess. So availability can be hit or miss. Now, when availability is low in particular, what do they do as far as discounting? First of all, there's this myth on the internet that I've read that says Rolex requires dealers to not discount. They fix the price, and if a dealer does give a discount, they're breaking the rules and risking losing their license to sell Rolex watches. Again, myth. I talked to, again, I'll call him a close friend, although, we don't have beers together or anything, but the guy that works at the authorized dealer that loaned me his Audemars Piguet Royal Oak and helped me out when my first Submariner was not working correctly. When I spoke to him about that, he said, no, that's just absolutely not true. They discourage you from giving huge discounts, but you absolutely can give whatever discount you want. They buy the watch, they own the watch. It's up to them what they want to sell it for, the dealers. So yeah, that's a myth. Now, what kind of discounts can you expect? I've only bought a couple of Rolexes. I don't know for sure what every dealer does, but, and again, availability is going to play into this a lot. If you go into a dealer a month before Christmas when production is low and Rolex isn't shipping them a lot of Submariners, for example, can you go ahead and ask for a discount? Probably not. They're probably going to laugh you right out of the store because they just don't have that many and they can sell them at full price. But where do you live? What is the slow time of year? Where I live, the slow time of year is, August, September. That's out of season. So if you go in August and say, I want to buy this watch, what can you do for me? Which is what I did. Now, I did two things. I was out of season, and it was just after the Hurricane Irma, that came through Florida. So the dealer had been closed for 2 or 3 weeks because they didn't have power. They haven't made a sale in several weeks. And it's not in season, so people aren't there buying watches. Well, I went in and said, what can you do for me? We talked about price, and I got roughly 12%. That was the discount that I got. My very first watch that I bought from them, the Explorer, which I subsequently sold, I got 10% with having no relationship or history with them. So yeah, you absolutely can get decent discounts. Could you do better than that? I don't know. Maybe you're a master haggler and you could do better. Maybe you can do 15, maybe you can do 20. I'm not really sure. But buying at an authorized dealer, that's been my experience so far. Now, that's discounts, that's availability. What about value? Is $8,550 a good value for this watch? Probably not. That's, the sad truth of it. You can get a $200 Seiko that is certainly nowhere near the level of quality of this watch, and maybe I should do a comparison of a Seiko SKX 007 and this Submariner. That might be for that would make for an interesting video. But yeah, you can get a $200 watch that's pretty darn good, and while this $8,550 watch is a whole heck of a lot better, it's not, what does that even work out to be? It's, is that 40 times better? I can't even do that math in my head right now. But yeah, it's not 40 or 50 times better. That's the moral of the story. That said, it is an excellent, borderline exceptional watch, despite the little things that I've nitpicked about it, despite some potential quality control problems. It is outstanding. It's fantastic. I'm happy that I bought it. I look forward to having it for a very long time, and I don't expect it to leave my collection. I'm all in, basically. So yeah, that's my review on the Rolex Submariner, reference 116610LN, or the black version. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a thumbs up in the, go ahead and leave a comment down below as well. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I'd appreciate it if you do subscribe. I put out new content on a weekly basis at a minimum, generally more often than that even. So yeah, stick around, check out some future videos, and go into my library and look at some older ones as well. I appreciate it, and we will see you again soon. Bye.